Good day. In this day, I'm going to talk about how to get unstuck during a job interview should you get asked a behavioral question you cannot answer. Okay, and why would you get asked such a difficult question? Well, maybe you didn't prepare for the interview because it's just a screening round, right? So the expectations are pretty low there. Or maybe, the interviewer got creative and they rewarded those interview questions in a fashion that you don't know how to answer, right? So what can you do in these situations? The first thing you may not be aware of is that interviewers will have a number of pre-planned questions they would ask most of the time, each and every candidate, and in the same order, like 3 or 4 questions. So it's not only the 1 or 2 questions they generally ask that they have prepared, but they have more questions just in case. Why was this be the case? Well, it's not necessarily because they know that you might get stuck, but rather because candidates don't always give conclusive answers to behavioral questions. So they would give some answers from which the interviewer wouldn't really understand how to evaluate you, or you wouldn't score too well, so maybe they would like to give you another chance to score even better, right? But long story short, if you're wondering on whether they do have a backup interview question, should you want to ask them for another one, yes, they do, right? So even though it's not, the ideal situation that you get stuck here, you can ask for another question, and it's not the end of the world. You're not disqualified from the interview if you ask for another question. Okay, this is according to my experience, and it's also possible to get up-leveled, right? Even if you get stuck in job interviews, right? Now, the second thing you should know here is a technique for people who don't really know how to answer the question they're getting asked, the behavioral question to be specific. They would do something on lines of understanding the behavior that the interviewer is interested in and looking in their stories to see, hey, do I have a story that would fit into this behavior maybe? Okay, so for example, if they ask you, tell me about a recent conflict with your boss. Okay, you may not have a recent conflict with your boss, but you may have a more interesting story of a conflict with a colleague, right? So it would still be a conflict. It would still be a way to sell yourself on your ability to earn people's trust and to, your interpersonal skills. So what you could do is to ask the interviewer, hey, interviewer, you know what, I don't have a recent conflict with a colleague, or with my boss, I should say, but would it be okay if I share with you a situation from which I learned a lot of a conflictual situation with my colleague? And you see, you would most likely, your interviewer will be happy with that specific story because at the end of the day, they want to evaluate the same thing, right? So understanding the key behavior there will be greatly beneficial in coming up with an amazing story that you can sell yourself on during this job interviews, right? In a behavioral interview, the best candidate is the one with the best stories, okay? Not the candidate who is able to answer the most questions, okay? Next point, a very common scenario that people employ when they don't know how to answer a non-technical interview question would be to employ a vague or a generic or a hypothetical type of answer. So for instance, how do you handle an unexpected conflict? Okay, it's an open-ended, even hypothetical question. Some people would go on the way of answering hypothetically, how you would go around the theory of handling unexpected conflict. This is a terrible idea. This is a very bad idea because unless you give them some specific examples, they will not be able to evaluate it. So your evaluation will be 0. You won't score any points with these types of answers, and it's going to perceive, that you're, basically wasting their time. Okay, so always try to give specific answers if you have them, and always try to focus on the best possible stories too, right? If not, then ask them for another question. Okay. Then another very common scenario is that, and this is not something that many candidates realize, is that some people often answer the wrong question in job interviews. So in other words, interviewers asking you, tell me about the time when you dealt with the conflict, and you tell them about the time when you handled the difficult situation with the customer, or a technicality or something like that. This could be for various reasons, such as they didn't understand the question and they're too shy to ask them for clarifications, or they forget the question midway through the answer, or maybe they simply want to bluff. Okay, so this is why it's important that you connect well with your interviewer, and if you want to improvise something, ensure have great rapport with them, and keep an eye on them to see on whether they're happy with what you're providing them, because sometimes they might be skeptical about this. Right? So all in all, the difference in behavioral interviews is in the stories you share with them, and not necessarily in your ability to answer as many interview questions, so to speak. All right, so if you get stuck in such a situation, take your time. You have time. Don't be in a hurry. No problem if you ask for some clarifying questions if you don't understand it. But at the end of the day, it's the best story who wins the interview. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.